Hi, it's Kate Brownfield from ADHDkidscanthrive.com. Thank you for listening and thank you for all your support. My guest today is Brice Hancock, former addict and founder of Mile High Recovery in Denver, Colorado. People with ADHD are a third more likely to struggle with addiction. And so I invited Brice on the show today for this episode to educate and inform parents and educators more about addiction, what it looks like, and how it affects a human being. May this episode help you if you're curious or worried about your own child or someone that you love. Let's get started. Hey, Brice, thank you for joining me. I'm looking forward to speaking to you today.
Great. Thanks for having me. It's an honor to be here.
You're welcome. Okay, so Brice, I'm really curious about your own personal story. Let's kind of start with there. You have overcome addiction and now you're the CEO of Mile High Addiction.
Yes,
right? Mile High Recovery Center.
Correct. Mile High Recovery Center. It's a residential treatment center with all levels of outpatient care and supportive sober housing in the city of Denver, Colorado.
Okay, so tell us your story of how this all came about.
Sure. So I left home at 18 and immediately became a daily blackout drunk. It seemed normal in college. I was just a partier. After college, when most of my friends matriculated to regular life, I did not. I moved to Baltimore, Maryland. I wanted to be a musician. I'm a musician. And so I moved there and within a few years was addicted to heroin and crack. And my alcoholism, of course, continued to spiral. And so I crashed and burned there and moved out to Denver, Colorado to try to get my act together, which did not happen. I drugged the bottom for another couple decades. I was playing music and I was booking bands, and I was so good at booking bands that I started booking for nightclubs. And at some point, a guy that owned a nightclub asked me if I wanted to own the bar. It's called the Toad Tavern in Littleton, Colorado. And I said, yes, but I don't have any money to buy a bar. And he said, I'll carry the loan for you. And so, oh no, I'm an alcoholic, bad, and I own a bar. And so 7 years later, I was completely physically dependent on alcohol. I was drinking about a half gallon of vodka a day. I would wake up, with the shakes, all the gnarly stuff, right, that happens for late stage alcoholics. And I was in and out of the doctor at one point, and he said, you are a late stage alcoholic. I give you a year to live if you can't stop drinking. And I couldn't stop drinking. I drank for well over a year because every day I knew I was dying, but it's like, I'm not dying. I'm not going to die today. I'm just going to get drunk today. And so through a lot of drama and trial and error, I got sober. I ended up in a psych hospital and I worked a 12-step program. I still am involved heavily with 12-step. And around 2 years sober, a therapist, I was in therapy, and she challenged me. What's your purpose? What does it all mean to you? I accepted the challenge and I started to ask myself questions like, what does it all mean? Who am I as a sober man? And who do I love? What do I want to do? And so who am I going to serve? Right. And so through an odd series of events, I opened up a sober house and my depression lifted. And I was having so much fun that I kept opening sober houses. Right. And so I had 9 sober houses, and the city of Denver said, you can't keep doing this. And so at that point, I shifted to treatment and I opened up outpatient treatment center.
Why did they say you can't keep doing that?
Because they have antiquated zoning laws. They have older zoning laws that don't allow for, 6, 8, 10, 12 unrelated people to live under one roof. And what that enables people to do is, if, let's say, you live on a nice block and I come in there and I say, hi, I'm Brice. I'm going to put 10 people in this house and they're all recovering alcoholics or recovering addicts. There's a good chance that the neighborhood's going to go, we don't want you here.
Yeah. Okay.
And so they go, oh, we're going to use the laws to keep you out. Right. And so I it was a whole thing. It was like 2 kids on the playground. waiting to see who's going to punch first. And so I hired an attorney, and I threatened to sue them in federal court. So anyway, I shifted to treatment. I kept the same amount of houses and shifted to treatment. And so that's a whole different ballgame. Right now I'm dealing with actual therapists and the Office of Behavioral Health, and we're charging insurance. And so, yeah, I just continued to grow my treatment center. And so that's kind of that's the nickel version of how it went down.
Can I ask you, do you have ADHD? Because this is the ADHD Kids Can Thrive podcast.
I do not.
Okay.
Now, I don't have diagnosed ADHD. Sometimes I wonder, but no.
Okay. Yeah. I was just curious.
Yeah.
I think probably my listeners would be curious as well. Okay. So you have real firsthand experience with addiction. So let's start with, can you update us on what addiction looks like in a young person? Like, what should parents look for if they're worried about their child being addicted? What are the signs?
The signs, I mean, what are your classics? Isolating, all of a sudden they have a whole new group of friends that you may probably not approve of. They're ditching activities they used to enjoy. They're depressed, they're anxious, they're moody, their sleeping patterns are becoming off. You're missing money. You know what I mean? Like, and you don't need to overthink it. Do they seem like they're maybe on drugs? Right?
I think as parents, you kind of go, is that really the sign? Or
sure.
Here's one I hear a lot is that, like you said, when you're 18 to 24, kind of the party scene is the thing. Everybody that age is drinking, smoking. Everybody's vaping now, I think, and marijuana is a big thing, and alcohol, right? So it's part of coming of age, right? So how, as a parent, when you're talking to yourself, figure out what is really a problem for your child versus just part of coming of age and participating in the party scene?
So, yeah, I hear you. The thing is, like, when I was a kid, I had every expectation I wasn't going to overdose and die just by experimenting with drugs. But fentanyl's, it's changed the game, right? It's in everything. It's in pressed pills. It's in cocaine. It's in crystal meth. And just, it's killing kids that aren't addicts, right? And so that conversation has to be out there because it's fatal and it's happening. It's the leading cause of death, I believe, from adults ages 18 to 45 is fentanyl. So that's a problem, right? You know, I mean, any good working definition of addiction, I believe, is you continue to do it despite negative consequences. And so it's like, what are the consequences? And you have to be realistic. Like, you know what I mean? Sometimes, like, what is normal will get moved. He's failing out of school. And often this is what happens is when people interface with the healthcare system for the first time with addiction, there's been a crisis, right? Like, so-and-so has been kicked out of school. They've ruined Thanksgiving. They've fallen asleep in the soup at dinner. They've gotten arrested. There's been an overdose, a hospitalization, or a DUI, or whatever it is, right? Then it's on. Then there's immediate need to fix the problem. Then that's when the real conversations start.
So here's my question. Do parents wait for the crises?
Probably. I mean, should they? No. In a perfect world, you're having conversations with your kid, but it's like you said, you know, is he just being moody because he's a teenager? Is this really a concern? Is he going to grow out of it? I mean, I'm a parent. I don't have those answers. You know, I'm not a therapist. I'm an entrepreneur and I'm sober and I've struggled with addiction and overcome it. And I'm a parent, but, you know, so I don't have all the answers. I'm a big fan of asking for support.
Okay. Let me add, do you know, are young people or any person diagnosed with ADHD, are they more at risk of struggling with addiction?
The easy answer is yes. I believe that they are. I just asked around here. I asked some of the therapists who, you know, they know more stats than I do. And the consensus is they're a third more likely to struggle with substance use disorder.
So a third more likely
than a normal kid. Sure. Yeah.
So can you tell us what the drugs of choice are right now for young people?
Yeah, I would say alcohol, marijuana, you know, weed, and vapes. Every young person here seems to vape. Yeah. So, you know, you can put weed in a vape. And, you know, again, when I was a kid, marijuana wasn't that big a deal. It really wasn't that strong. It is now. It is a big deal. It's very strong. It's a problem. I have kids in treatment whose drug of choice is smoke a pot or, wax or dabs or edibles or whatever it is.
I know. I think that generation, so I have young adult children and I have a lot of friends who have young adult children, and it is all about the vape. And it seems like marijuana. And I think it's because they feel like marijuana isn't a big deal.
Yeah. And that you're right.
And that it's not as clearly as destructive as alcohol is.
I believe that's true. It's probably not as destructive as alcohol is, but that doesn't mean that, you should just start dabbing or
Every day.
smoking wax every day, right? I mean, your brains aren't formed. You're a kid, right? And it's so strong. I mean, it's so strong. There's all kinds of new problems that it's interesting because they legalized it here in Colorado. The first thing they did was figure out how to make it stronger. So now we're seeing the repercussions of that.
And then in California too, they made it. So I think the law is 21, but they made it a medical card if you're 18.
Yeah. The truth is I never had a hard time finding pot when I was a kid. I'm sure they don't have it now. They don't have a hard time finding it, whether they get it legally or not.
Okay. So Brice, you touched a little bit on this. Fentanyl, you said, is the leading cause of death for people 18 to 45.
Sure. And, again, I'm not a therapist. Anyone who's listening should just Google it. And I'm quite sure that's what's going to pop up. So 18 to 45, the leading cause of death is now fentanyl overdose.
And are people who are dying of fentanyl, is that more because they're experimenting with drugs, or are they addicts who are running into more fentanyl? Is it across the board?
I don't think most of them are addicts. I mean, I think most of them are, they get a pill. They don't know where it came from. The chances are that any pill that you get that was not created or bought at a pharmacy has fentanyl in it. It's a common story now. People think they're getting a little cocaine and there's fentanyl in it, or they think they're getting MDMA. Back in the day, you could experiment with Molly or ecstasy. It's got fentanyl in it. And, it's so strong. It's so powerful that it kills them instantly.
So what should parents tell their kids?
Geez, again, I'm a big fan of just having a conversation. We don't need to complicate this. You just need to tell your kids and they know. I think the problem is kids think they're invincible. As parents, we know we're not invincible, right? And so they just have to have the conversation and just again, I have kids and I'm just going to say, look, when I was a kid, I could experiment with kids, but it is not a good time to be a kid on the party scene, right? And so you have to know fentanyl's in everything. Assume it's in everything. And, I don't want to I would never get into a thing with my kid, where you're going to keep Narcan in the car and we're going to have a fentanyl test kit. Although I think they're both good ideas. It's let's just not do that.
What do you think, Brice, is going on with mental health when it comes to social media and video games and addiction in that sense?
I think a lot of it all comes down to, honestly, to dopamine. And I was doing a little reading. The new, you correct me if I'm wrong, the new term for ADHD is dopamine deficit disorder, right?
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Which really doesn't mean a deficit. It means it's dysregulated, I think.
Right.
So with social media there is no diagnosis for social media addiction, I don't believe. Video games, I think maybe there is, right? But I think it's dopamine. And I think what social media has done is it's created anxiety that you also get a dopamine hit from. So it's kind of created the problem and it's also the cure. So it's all about dopamine for me. And it's I think the problem is when I was a kid, when you were a kid, I didn't have social media. I didn't have a phone. I didn't have video games. I had to be bored. Being bored was part of life. And I have a 12-year-old now. And if he's bored for 5 minutes, it's the end of the world. And it's how do you learn to use your brain if you're never bored? You know what I'm saying?
It's hard to concentrate.
Well, it's hard to concentrate. It's hard to become creative. I had to think of things to do. And I just think that's part of growing up and just part of being a human being. And now kids, it's access to everything. That's in and of itself not a bad thing, right? Information's a good thing. But the dopamine hit you get when you check social media is a problem.
Do you find the young people that are coming into your recovery are struggling more with their mental health because of these things?
Yeah, I do. I definitely do. And honestly, I like social media. I might have a problem with it sometimes, but I'm not in treatment for addiction. And so I think it's really easy when when you get into recovery, it's a time to focus on yourself, to go in and to learn about, what's going on. And if you have another distraction like social media or your phone or video games, you don't have to do that.
What would be your advice for parents around that? You just got to navigate it. And
I just navigate it and just have the conversations. I limit, video game time and screen time for my kids. And it's hard because that's what I fight about all the time is, the iPad.
it's just the key. I would agree with that the key is just to limit it. Okay. So Brice, I thought this was interesting. You guys at your recovery center talk about stimulant medication and how it can affect a person long-term. Can you just give us some more insight as a parent who has a kid with ADHD who may be more dysregulated, if you will, impulsive, those kind of things that may make them more prone to addiction? What do they need to consider with their stimulant? If they're kids with ADHD are prescribed stimulant medication to get through school. But I think what's missing from the story is kind of the arc of what that looks long term for that child, right? And what that may look like. So what is that looking like in addiction in your recovery center?
Well, I can give you my opinion and I can tell you what I see, right? I mean, my opinion is that you have a kid with unmedicated ADHD, right? And the first line of defense is a stimulant and they work. And so, what do you got to do? You have a kid and they're struggling and you have a problem here, now, today. And here's a solution. There is, as far as I can tell, there's no evidence that these stimulants are going to create substance use disorder long term. I think what's probably more of a problem is that, you're putting a substance into a young person's brain and their brain isn't fully formed. So we do get kids, young men, young women, early 20s, who are stimulant addicts. And they are also diagnosed ADHD and they get into treatment. And of course they want their medicine right away because they have ADHD. And that's fine. That's all well and good. In treatment, we believe that you should detox from the substances. It's a good controlled environment. It's a place to kind of reset. And then, moving forward, if you need the ADHD stimulant medication, that's fine.
So it's not considered addictive. If you're suffering from addiction, it's a good time to detox all.
That's my opinion. Yeah. And I'm an alcoholic to the core. I can't have a sip of beer, right? And so if you get a kid who's like really ruined their life because of crystal meth or cocaine or whatever stimulant it is, you want them to detox. You don't want to just get them back on the Adderall or the Ritalin or the Vyvanse or whatever it is.
Are they taking like hard drugs and stimulant medication?
No, by the time they hit here, it's usually crystal meth. I mean, you ask me the popular drugs with kids, it's alcohol, it's weed, it's vapes. By the time they end up here, it's usually crystal meth, it's usually fentanyl, it's usually, much harder alcohol abuse.
So they've really hit skid row, so to speak.
They have. It's like, it's time to like buy into long-term recovery at that point.
Yeah. So, okay. I think parents see addiction maybe with their kids and they're over 18. There's are these myths? Okay. One, what kind of power do parents have after their children become 18 and older? Do they have any power and influence in helping their adult child get into recovery?
Sure. Yes, they do. Most of my clients are still on their parents' insurance until they're 26. They're considered failure to launch, which, failure to launch is, we believe that it's actually a trauma response by the parents because they won't let the kid fail. Failing's part of life, right? And so what happens is the kid fails, parents swoop in because they want control because they're having a trauma response. Do you hear what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so again, I'm a big fan of getting support. So if your adult child is failure to launch, you need to get support. And then you need to use the support to place boundaries around your own behavior and around your kids' behavior.
So does that mean you don't influence them to get into recovery?
You totally influence them. So, but with support, right? Because I believe that the boundaries have to be done in an organized way. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
I can't just give my addict kid $40 at a place to stay. You know what I
Oh,
mean?
like okay. So parents won't let them live on the street. Or, I
Right.
mean, that's really, really hard, I would think, to do
It is hard,
as a
but
parent.
by the time your kid's 18, they're an adult. And with the drugs that are out there, it's a serious situation. It's a much different conversation than when your teenage kid who's living at home is, slipping, having problems. By the time they're 18, it's a different conversation because it's time for the family and for the kid to buy into long-term recovery. And what does that look like moving forward?
So I live in California, so it makes me think of all the addicts
Mhm.
who are struggling with mental health that just live on the streets, right? It's super complicated.
It is. And, we have really smart people. We have, psychiatrists here that prescribe medication.
All right, Brice, I have a question. So if you do have a child, let's say they're like in their late 20s and they're addicted, they're barely hanging on in life, like what do those parents do?
Well, again, it's time to interface with the system. It's time to buy into long-term recovery. It's time to get support. That's going to come down to finances. A large part of finances. I can tell you this is that the families who get their own help, who get their own care, their own therapy, the addicts do better.
Okay, when the parents are getting the help.
It's a family disease. It's a family system.
So if you seek guidance, seek support through that, you're going to figure out what you should be doing for your family member.
There's a fine line between love and enabling and loving your kids to death, right?
Okay, so tell me about what are options for treatment and how do parents navigate the cost?
Yeah, the cost is a big deal. Again, you gotta get support, and you have to figure out what level of care is needed. Does that mean residential treatment? Maybe it doesn't. Maybe it just means IOP, outpatient level of support. Maybe it just means therapy, so you got to figure that out. Obviously, the higher level of care costs more money. If there is no insurance, if you can't use insurance, you're going to have to figure that out, right? And so for my money, if God forbid my kid was struggling, I would figure out how to keep him in sober living for as long as possible because I know where he is. I know he's clean. I know he's sober. I know he's getting support. I know he's safe. And the truth is it's cheaper than rent to have a kid living in sober living. And then I would try to get him as much support as I could with my insurance, the card to my wallet, whatever it is. And I would try to keep him just contained for as long as possible.
Okay. So Brice, when you went into sober living, how did you pay for that?
I did not go to sober living. I actually opened a sober living. There's scholarships available, but the truth is it's like, so ideally, if you've really hit bottom and you have to go to residential treatment, you're going to get out of residential treatment and you're going to go to a sober house. Sober houses can be anywhere from $500 a month to, I don't know, $2,000 a month. But the majority of them, at least around here, are about $800 to $1,000 a month. And that's cheaper than rent. And you can work. Just because you're going to outpatient treatment doesn't mean you can't get a job and support yourself.
Okay. And then Brice, what does recovery look like for a person? Like, what is that about? What is the person trying to achieve?
Yeah, it's funny. We had an all staff meeting yesterday, 35 of us in the industry. And we broke into small groups and everybody had to talk about what their definition of recovery was. And there was 35 different definitions. So, what does it mean? It's personal. Any recovery is good recovery. It can be anywhere from harm reduction to complete abstinence. I'm a 12-step guy, so complete abstinence is what I practice. And, it's different. It's definitely changing what's going on, or we wouldn't be talking about it, right?
So it's just an improvement from the crises.
It's an improvement from the crises. It's moving out of the crises. If you're doing fentanyl and crystal meth, hopefully you're not doing that anymore. Like hopefully recovery means, for me, it means I'm not going to die from alcoholism and addiction. And it means that I have to do something literally every day to keep my disease in remission. That's what recovery means to me.
And do you recommend most people do 12-step? This is the other buzz I hear is like that if you're more using marijuana, that does this 12-step program work for a person who's more addicted to using marijuana?
And I haven't heard that. I don't know why it wouldn't. I mean, I go to AA, but you don't find just pure alcoholics anymore. It almost doesn't exist. Everybody's doing something else, And so it's like, it's really, for me, it's whether you buy into abstinence or not. Like, are you going to be abstinent moving forward? Because if you are, a 12-step program is great. But I have many friends come to me and they'll say, I think I'm struggling with drinking, or I'm struggling with whatever it is. And I always tell them, like, be very careful, because what I do is a whole thing. I had to change my whole life completely because I was dying. So make sure, I just tell them, are you sure you can't stop on your own? Are you sure you can't manage it? Are you sure you can't control it?
Okay.
So I don't know the 12 steps for everybody. I honestly don't. It is for people like myself.
But you don't think it's for everybody?
I don't know that it's for everybody.
Okay.
I think the majority of people who are struggling, something bad happens and they're able to just go, whoa, I need to stop doing that. And they'll stop doing whatever it is that they're doing. I was unable to do that.
Yeah.
Nothing was going to stop me. Multiple DUIs, multiple trips to detox, a total catastrophe.
Yeah.
And I continued to drink.
And then something just hit you one day and you said, that's it. You just accept.
I was a late stage alcoholic and I didn't want to die. I was just too scared to die. That's what my bottom was.
And you were starting to feel it.
I was definitely starting to feel it.
Okay. It's incredible. Incredible story. Okay, so Brice, what would be your words of wisdom for parents who are concerned? Kind of wrap it up here. These are for parents who are concerned their child is really struggling with addiction. What would be your words of wisdom for them?
I think it's important to let your child fail and don't immediately pick them up. If you think your child's struggling, do the appropriate measures. Reach out for support. If they're struggling with addiction, reach out to somebody for support with that. If it's failure to launch, I think it's important to let them fall and fail and not pick them up immediately.
Yeah, that's good.
It's interesting advice, but I think it's true.
So, okay, I have actually a specific person I'm thinking when you say this. How do you ever pick them up, or do you let them live on near the streets for as long as until they kind of until they get to the point where they go, you know what, I'm dying and I don't want to die. I mean, is that what a parent has to do?
Yeah, right. You got to let them hit bottom. I think your job is to always try to help, but this is what help looks like, right? Like, it's like baking chocolate chip cookies. You have a certain amount of butter, certain amount of flour, certain amount of sugar, certain amount of chips. This is what it looks like. And this is what the help's going to look like. And when you're ready, the help is here, but you're not going to stay in my house. I'm not going to give you money. And I think that's important. I think that's an important boundary, is to not enable them, right?
Oh, to enable them. Right?
Yeah, because if I'm giving them a place to stay, and even if I'm giving them $10, they're going to try to make some moves with that, right? But that doesn't mean that I'm going to close my door if they want help.
Yeah. So they got to want the help.
They got to want the help, and the help is here. I got you when you're ready for the help, but it doesn't look like what you want it to look like. It looks like what I want it to look like, because I contacted, I got support, and they told us this is what it looks like.
Great. Thanks, Brice.
Yeah. Thank you.
I appreciate it.